history. I told you this is a history of Christianity course, but it's theological history. And I want to talk to you a little bit about why do I make that specific separate those terms. We live in a world today that tends to look at history as something that is static and rigid. Something that we can look back in time and say, this took place at this particular time. This is what it looked like. It's static, it's rigid. In fact, here's a question. How do you know when you walk into a library or you walk into a bookstore and you pick up a book and you're thumbing through it, how do you know the book that you picked up was a history book? What are some of the elements of a history book that let you know right off the bat when you look at it? The title. What else?
It's got dates.
It's got dates, right? It's going to be heavily inundated with things that happen at a particular time. And what about those dates? Oh, I'm sorry. You can say whatever else you were going to say.
Yeah, I can answer that question too. But they're very specific to the date and time in which the event actually happens.
Mm-hmm.
Point, and then also the cover image.
Right. So the cover image is going to let you know I'm looking at history. You know, it's got a compass, a globe, right? Something, and if it's for a particular period of time, it's going to be something that university is recognized as from that period. And then the dates themselves are very linear. You're going to be able to open the book up. It's going to have a 1 point, and whatever span the book is supposed to cover, that's going to be at the end. This all reflects how in Western civilization, when we think about history, that's how we think of history. It's linear, it's rigid, it's static. Things like dates are written in a linear objective style, as if we had, and this is the reason why, you know, movies that depict people going back in time are very popular. Because the idea is we can go back to a specific time in a particular place, and this is how it's going to look, right? However, if you think about those movies, what always is the case? Isn't always, it's not exactly the way they expected it to be when they go back in that time. And that's really the true case when it comes to history. History, in actuality, is more than just dates. It's more than just names, and it's more than just events. History is more than about the list of things that happened, or even how it happened. History is also, and what most people actually find interesting about history, is why it happened. What does that moment in time tell us about ourselves now? That's the reason why we're interested in history. I'm going to give you an example. Some of you have heard this example before, so bear with me, but I think it illustrates when we say history, really what we're looking for. Let's say you walk out of this class today, and as you're walking out the hallway, you see somebody, a fellow student, walk by, and you're like, wow, that is the most beautiful human being I've ever seen in my life. I've got to holler at that, right? Y'all say that? I don't know how y'all say it anymore. But anyway, so you walk up to them and you say, hey, what's going on? How you doing? They're like, hey, what's up? You know, so the friendly haze is good. And you say, what you doing tonight? And they're like, I don't know, whatever the wind takes, you know, that's what's gonna happen. Right? I don't know what y'all say. Work with me here, okay? I'm old. All right, so I'm just trying to be hip. All right, so hip is not even a word anymore, is it? Anyway, so you guys make an arrangement to go to, I don't know where y'all go here, Starbucks to have a coffee. I don't know what y'all do, okay? I'm 45 years old, been married 20-something years. I don't have that problem anymore. But anyway, whatever y'all do, you're sitting there, or at least you make plans to go to Starbucks. What time? 7:30. Great. I don't even Starbucks is open at 7:30. But anyway, 7:30. You go back to your dorm room and you start getting ready. You know what I mean by getting ready. You put the smell good on, you're making sure the hair is right. You're not wearing what you wore all day. You put new stuff on because you got to be fresh, right? And you go and you sit there and you're waiting. You get there at 7:30. Matter of fact, you get there at 7:25 because you know I want to be. I already got a seat. 7:45. Anybody there? The barista comes from around the counter. I'm like, you need something? No, I'm good. I'm waiting on somebody. Oh, okay. 8:15. Anybody there? The barista's like, we close in 15 minutes, sir. We need you to order up or get out. You ain't got to go home, but you got to leave here. So you leave. Person never showed up. Thursday, you walk out of my class. You walk outside, you see that person again. And you stop them. And you say, what happened? If they start giving you a list of events that took place as to why they could not be there, is that really what you ask? Nope. Are you going to be satisfied with their list? No. You're going to be like, I'm not asking what happened. I want to know why. What was your intention in the first place? That is what you're searching for. It's the same thing when I talk about specifically theological history. I really don't care about the list of events that took place. I want to know why they happened. What is the connection? What is the intention, right? How is it affecting me now? That is what we're going to be studying in this course. When we talk about church history, we are talking about more than just the history of the church. We're talking more. You're never going to, I'm hesitating, I'm thinking about it. Yeah, you're never going to get from me a quiz on memorizing a list of popes for a particular period. That's history. That's not theological history. Right? If I ask you about a particular pope in a particular period of time, it's because it has a direct effect on current Christian tradition. When we talk about ecumenical councils in the history of the church, I'm just not asking for a list of what was the ecumenical council, what year did it take place, who convened it. To me, I'll be honest with you, I don't even know that stuff unless I look at it, because it's not so important. What's important is what theological effects took place out of the decrees out of that council. What's interesting, and what I hope you find interesting in this course that many of you were required to take, is the political intrigue, the assassination attempts by popes, love triangles, yes, love triangles, illegitimate children. How many of you, this is dated, and most of you probably you shouldn't have been reading this. Anyway, when it came out, how many of you are familiar with the book Shades of Grey? Wow, I'm old. All right. So when Shades of Grey came out, it was like this erotic book that was huge controversy because it had some, let's just say, it was not appropriate reading if you were under the age of 18. Okay, let's just say that. Now, I'm not saying I read it. Okay, I'm not saying that I read it. However, The reviews that came out of it, as I'm looking at it, I'm like, this isn't nothing different than certain aspects of Christian history, to be honest with you. It's the juicy stuff. It's the stuff that you don't lead with, okay? But that is important parts of Christian history. And quite frankly, it's interesting parts of Christian history because, as we'll get into, the basic fundamental doctrine of the Christian church is what? That God was 100% man and 100% divine. He was here. That he died, was resurrected, and because of that, we have an opportunity of redemption ourselves and to share his divine divinity. So the whole idea is, even though we're broken in Christianity, we have the opportunity to share in his divine nature. Therefore, the history of Christianity should be the same thing. Right? Despite the fact that we're broken, it is still, the idea is it's still a holy church. Christian history is about saints and nuns. It's true. But it's also about sinners and heretics. They're part of the tradition. It's about kings. It's about empires. It's about empires that rose and got strong because of the Christian tradition. But it's also about empires and kings who fail because of Christianity. Christianity is all about, and this is the most ironic thing to me, I call it the huge Christian paradox, and that is, in its beginning, the Christian community was all about separating themselves, withdrawing themselves from the world to answer God's call and to follow the life of Jesus. But that very separation over time created an institution that became a major influence in the world. It's a huge paradox. They tried to separate themselves, but in the separating themselves, they created an institution that affected the whole world. Another thing I want to say about history in general, this is both theological history and history as a science. History is what I call interested language. Interested language. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's say two of the Maddies here, I don't care, grab two. Two of the Maddies here got into an argument. And regardless of what the argument was about, let's say I wanted them each to write the circumstances around the argument. I'm not part of their retelling of the argument. When I go to them and say, okay, tell me what happened, tell me what happened, and they're separate from each other, they're going to retell to me the circumstances surrounding the argument. How many of you believe that they're going to be exactly the same? Nope. Are they both telling me the truth? Sure. Because they're telling it from their interested language. They're telling it from the perception that they saw the events take place. Again, this goes back to what I said about history. History is not rigid, it's not static. One Maddie is telling me from their perspective. The other is telling me from their perspective. Both of them feel that they're being very objective. And what's my role as a historian? I take the stories that are given to me, the evidence is there, and if let's just say, I had to recount to the class what happened because it happened in front of everybody, right? and I had to recount what happened. What I have to do is basically take all the stories that I have, the evidence that I have, and give my best interpretation of the events. So when we say history, we're not really talking about what actually occurred. We're talking about what the historian created. So all history is created history. Now, to the great historians, they're trying to be as objective as possible, but at the end of the day, because they weren't there, they're interpreting information that's there. Even if, in today's day and age, let's say Jesus was born this Christmas, right? And let's say Mary was a social media genius and started recording from day one. He came out, we got pictures, there's live streams, there's stories being told. Jesus is on the map. And he is on the map from the time he's born all the way up until he dies. Guess what? There's still stuff you ain't gonna know. They can record every single second, but there's stuff you're just not gonna know. There's nuances you're not gonna know. If someone is retelling it, they're going to have to create certain aspects of it. This is the reason why I say history is interesting language, and we have to make sure. Throughout this course, especially when I give you the weekly assignments and you're giving me your reflections on how you feel, there are a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind. These are things that are important whenever we are evaluating history. Number one, make sure you're finding the correct starting place. In today's day and age, we have many sources for learning, a lot more than even when I was younger. You have obviously texts and books, you have professors, you've got movies, you've got websites. When I grew up, a long time ago, what do you think is the first place? When I was in high school and I had to do a report, where do you think I went?
Library.
I went to the library, but what source in the library do you think I use the most? What do you think kids use the most? You probably don't even know such a thing even existed, okay? We had what was called encyclopedias. World Book Encyclopedia. It said World Book in gold on the side. Everybody used to fight over them because there was only one volume in the school, right? It was A through D, and then E through F. I'm not gonna go through the rest of the alphabet because I will undoubtedly miss a letter. But the point is, everyone's fighting over one static book. And the teachers used to know whether you did the history report, because guess what they could do? Go to that stack that they know all the kids use and see whether or not you looked it up. Today, you don't have encyclopedias. What do we have? Huh? Google. And that's funny you say that. So if you put a subject in Google, what's usually the first link that shows up? Wikipedia. Wikipedia, which by the way, I'm gonna tell you right now, that is not a source, okay? But why do professors say Wikipedia isn't a source? Does anybody know why?
Because people go and go.
Right. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I try to stay, because I got teenage kids, right? I got kids all the way from. By the way, if you haven't had it before, you're gonna know all about my family by the end of this lecture. By the end of this class, because that's all I use is my family as an example. But anyway, I got an 11-year-old up to a 27-year-old. So I try to stay relevant. And I try to appreciate. A lot of professors, they poo-poo Wikipedia like, well, you don't even know who put what in there. That's true, but I think it also reflects how we learn today. We don't learn from a static setting. We kind of do communal learning, right? The first thing, now sometimes it backfires, especially during the election season, it backfires big time. But what do we normally do? We hear something and we go to our friend and be like, hey, did you hear this? What you think about this? What do you think about this, right? Wikipedia is just an example of that. But again, I think it emphasizes what I'm saying about make sure you have the correct source. Make sure you're going to the right place. Every time you have a question does not necessarily mean that you, big umbrella, you go to anyone that's under that umbrella. What do I mean? If I'm talking to you about the history of the church, and we are talking about the liturgy or the worship of the church, and I'm asking a very practical question about practitioners of the faith, it would make sense then to go to the local priest and perhaps ask them questions about practicing the faith, because that's what they do, okay? Now, I'm saying this with all respect to the office of the priesthood, which I have an immense respect for. However, if I'm asking you about a specific event in theological history and the effects that said moment of history has on the development of the theology of the church, the priest may not be the primary source, because it's not what they do on a regular basis. All right. In that case, if you're going to go to a clergy, it's going to be someone who's teaching in an academic environment. Does that make sense? You got to qualify your source a little bit more. I'm telling you right now, I'm not the person to come to if you're asking me about anything to do with liturgy. I do what I'm supposed to do when I go to church. They sitting down, I'm sitting down. I'm kneeling, they kneeling. I try to figure out what the parish does, because every parish do stuff a little bit different, right? I'm not a liturgy, at least practical liturgy. I know more than you, but I'm not an expert at that. But I am an expert. Yeah, I'm patting my own back. I'm an expert in the history of liturgy, right? Like the development of liturgy, but not the practical stuff. So make sure you have the right source. Another thing I want to say about source before I move on, and it's okay whenever you're looking up a source in history, it's okay, obviously, to get different sides of the same issue, but make sure you're recognizing whether the source is either hostile to the issue that you're talking about or in favor of the issue. All right. What we don't want to do is just look for what agrees with us and say, okay, here's my source. Right? You want to make sure that you're getting both sides of the argument. The second thing, make sure that you have the right lenses that you're looking for. When we look at the history of the Roman Catholic Church, we ought to keep in mind what specific lens, and this is only you can answer this question. Now, I'm going to, as the professor, I'm going to give you a lens to look through. And I'm going to be very, and I'll talk about this in a moment, I'm going to be very blunt about what lens I'm looking through the history of Christianity. But when you get those assignments, the weekly assignments, it's okay for you to look through a different lens. Does that make sense? Matter of fact, I want you, I'm the nosy one, remember? I want to know if you're looking through a different lens, okay? And what do I mean by lenses? There are three particular lenses that you want to keep in mind as you are in your text, certainly your textbook identifies three different lenses that it will use. And I will try my best to let you know in my lecture which lens I'm using for each topic. One lens that is important to, in your conversations about the history of Christianity, is there is a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is about learning things. It's just about learning stuff. Right? Wisdom is about understanding them. It's two different things. Some of you may have experienced this already in college. In high school, most cases, because quite frankly, they teach the test, you're taught a lot of knowledge. It's very content driven, right? And then you get the standardized testing where you have to regurgitate information that has been given to you. Right? That's knowledge. I'm not saying that that's a negative thing. I'm saying that's how it is. Sorry. That's how it is in high school. In college, you're given knowledge, but you're also asked more predominantly about wisdom. Do you understand it? There's application questions. And the first time you get a question, a lot of times freshmen, they have an adjustment period where they hear the lectures and they remember everything. But then the exam comes and their application question, they're like, wait, that's not what I tested for, right? There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. It is particularly the case. There's this balance. Quite frankly, it creates tension in the history of the church between just knowing stuff and then understanding it. Because what happens is when there have been people in the history of the church who, when they move to understand it, guess what they do? They challenge, what are you actually saying? So they take it all the way to its, I guess I want to say, the consequences, the implications of what you're saying we need to know, which sometimes causes challenges. The church, in its history, has always seen itself as the keeper of wisdom, as the great interpreter of knowledge. The church, in its history, has always felt it's going to tell you how to understand the knowledge. As history moved on, and what I call the social capital moved from the clergy to the people, this really is prominent in the next class, but from the clergy to the people, you start having this now pushback and challenge on whether the church is the only interpreter of knowledge. The second lens that we will see when we take this information, we're going to see the tension, and that is between political power and social influence. Now, we live in a society today, particularly our nation, the United States, where there is on paper anyway, a separation between church and the state. However, in the early history of the church, this is a foreign idea, right? In the early history of the church held extraordinary political power and social influence. In fact, we're going to be talking about periods of time in which the popes themselves ruled nation states. Today, while with the exception of the Vatican itself, popes are not heads of states, the church still holds a significant influence politically and socially. In this course, we will look at the tension between political power and social influence, and where the church at various times where it fell on that spectrum. And lastly, and this is probably the most important, and that is when you're looking at the history of the church, you want to recognize whether or not you're looking at it from an inside view or an outside view. Let me give you an example. When I was I was a graduate student. When I was a graduate student at Harvard, I would come home in the summer and just like by the way, as college students, you're gonna be broke for a long time. All right, so, because I was broke for a very long time as a college student, even graduate school, didn't have no money. So I used to come home in the summer and work, and I did an internship with St. Patrick's Church in Youngstown. And Father Noga, who was a priest at the time, he was trying to lead a community, it's called Community Action Program. And my job was to go out and knock on doors in the community and let them know about this community action plan and invite them to come to the church for the meetings that we were having so that we can positively affect the community in which we live. Now, St. Patrick's Church, St. Patrick, what would you think if the church is called St. Patrick's Church? What do you think is the history or the demographic historically of that church? What demographic of Catholics? St. Patrick. Irish Catholics, right? Historically, that neighborhood that was around the church, I'll probably say in the 50s and 60s, was all Irish Catholics. You come here, but this time it was 2014, there were no more Irish Catholic families in the community. The community were all African-American families. But St. Patrick's was still right in the middle of that community. St. Patrick's, if you've ever seen, is a beautiful church. Very tall, well, I'm about to get to my point why I'm saying it's a beautiful church. Very tall, you can see the church. You look out the window of any home around it, you can see the spires of the church. It was served as the cathedral of Youngstown for a long period of time. I'm walking around the neighborhood, I'm inviting people. Every neighborhood, particularly in neighborhoods of color, there's always one or two individuals in the community that knows everybody. Like, they've been there forever. They know everybody in the community. They kind of got the pulse of what's going on in the community. I'm walking around knocking on doors. This gentleman comes out to me and says, "Hey, young man, let me talk to you for a minute." He said, "I hear that you're inviting people to the church for community work." I said, "Yeah, absolutely." He said, "Come with me over to the church for a minute." So I go over to the church and I'm standing in front of the church and he says to me, he knows, looking at me, I'm looking at the church like I'm just in love. Like I think it's the most beautiful building. Just love the church. And so he asked me, "What do you like about this church? Why do you find it so beautiful?" And I said, "Man, look, look at the vertical lines. It reaches all the way up to the heavens. I can't tell because they're so far away. I don't know if it's gargoyles or if it's angels, but in any case, there's something up there looking down, Gothic looking. It is beautiful. Big, huge wooden doors that you need two people to open. It is wonderful." He says to me, "That's an inside view." In other words, that is how you see it because that's how you've been formed to the standard of beauty, theological beauty. For all of us in the community, that looks like a building that we just can't get into. And it's overlooking us everywhere we are. They got these doors we can't get into. People are coming in for whatever church service you guys have. They're not part of the community, and then they're leaving. He helped me appreciate I had an inside view. He had an outside view. So sometimes if you're on the outside, the perception of the lens that you see is going to be completely different than when you're in the inside. In this course, I'm not going to lie to you, you are getting an inside view from me. I can't escape it, okay? I am a practicing Catholic, and I'm a Catholic theologian. You're getting an inside view. I will try my best to point out various outside views, but I'm looking for you also in this course, whether it's here in class, by your questions, or in your weekly assignments, to give me an outside view. Does that make sense?